I spent my entire wedding day terrified that my mother was taking her last breath. I had absolutely no idea she was sipping champagne on a private beach 3,000 miles away.
For as long as I can remember, my life was dictated by an invisible, suffocating force. That force was my mother's health. Or rather, her constant lack of it.
She was never diagnosed with anything specific, mind you.
There was no name for her condition, no concrete medical chart, and certainly no cure.
Instead, she suffered from a constantly shifting array of symptoms.
If I had a school play, she'd suddenly develop a severe migraine. When I graduated college, she collapsed in the driveway exactly 10 minutes before we were supposed to leave. She claimed her legs just gave out from the stress of my milestone.
I missed my own graduation to sit with her in an emergency room.
And of course, the doctors told us she was perfectly fine. They said she was just slightly dehydrated.
I grew up believing my mother was a fragile bird,
A delicate piece of glass that the world was constantly trying to shatter.
and I believed it was my sole responsibility to protect her. That's what a guilt complex does to you. It rewires your brain until you can't distinguish between love and obligation. You start to view your own happiness as a direct threat to the person you're supposed to care for.
Everything changed when I met David.
David was kind, grounded, and intensely observant.
He was the first person in my life who looked at my family dynamic and didn't immediately shower my mother with pity.
He watched the way she operated.
He noticed how her mysterious ailments only seemed to strike when the attention was on me,
Or when I was about to do something that didn't involve her.
The first time David and I planned a weekend getaway, my mother called me in tears. She said her chest felt tight and she was terrified she was having a heart episode.
I panicked, ready to cancel the trip entirely, but David stayed completely calm.
I was ready to cancel the whole trip right then and there. But David didn't even flinch.
So he just calmly offered to drive her to the ER himself and pay for all her tests.
Funny enough, the second he made that offer, her chest pain magically disappeared.
Suddenly, she just needed to rest. She told us she didn't want to be a burden.
David just looked at me with this quiet understanding. He never called her a liar to my face, but he gently started showing me the pattern I was too blind to see.
When David proposed, it was the happiest moment of my life.
For the first time, I felt like I was actually allowed to have a future. Everything felt perfect. I couldn't wait to tell my mom.
I called her the second we got back, practically bursting with excitement.
I just wanted her to be happy for me.
But the second I told her, the temperature in the room just plummeted. There was this long, heavy silence. Then just a deep, exhausted sigh.
She didn't say congratulations. She didn't even ask to see the ring.
She just said she hoped my wedding wouldn't trigger a massive flare-up of her condition.
Planning that wedding turned into an absolute psychological battlefield. Every single decision I made was countered by a new medical crisis.
It was exhausting.
If I wanted a summer wedding, she said the heat would make her faint.
If I wanted an evening reception, her chronic fatigue would act up.
I couldn't win.
I felt so selfish for just wanting a normal wedding. I spent hours crying in my car after visiting her.
I honestly believed my happiness was physically destroying my own mother.
About 4 months before the wedding, she sat me down crying.
She told me her health was going downhill fast. She made it seem like she was literally running out of time. She said her doctors found this specialized holistic clinic out of state.
It was her last hope, but insurance wouldn't cover a dime.
The price tag?
Exactly $8,000. David and I were paying for the whole wedding ourselves. We'd been saving for years, skipping vacations and working crazy overtime. Every single dollar in that account was hard-earned. But seeing her look so weak just completely broke me. I couldn't walk down the aisle knowing I denied her care for some catering. So the next morning, I transferred the $8,000 right to her account. We had to totally gut our wedding plans after that. We canceled the band, cheapened the menu, and slashed the guest list. It sucked, but I kept telling myself I was saving her life. She was supposed to go to the clinic and be back a week before the wedding. But as the day got closer, she totally ghosted me. She'd just text saying that treatments made her too weak to talk. Then, 5 days before the wedding, she dropped the bomb. I got this massive, dramatic text from her while I was in the kitchen. My stomach just completely dropped as I read it. She said the doctors strictly forbade her from traveling. She claimed the stress of my wedding would cause a fatal relapse. She told me she couldn't come to my wedding. She was too sick. I literally collapsed on the kitchen floor and sobbed. I couldn't even breathe. The guilt was just eating me alive. I honestly felt like a monster who pushed her own mom over the edge. I was ready to cancel the whole wedding right there. But David found me on the floor and just held me. He didn't argue. He just kept me grounded when I was falling apart. David just held me there on the floor. He gently reminded me that everything was already paid for and people were flying in. He said my mom would want me to be happy. Honestly, I think he just said that to get me down the aisle. My wedding day was just a total blur of forced smiles and heavy anxiety. If you look at the photos now, you can literally see how tense my shoulders are. My eyes were completely red from crying. I was terrified she was taking her last breath. Walking down the aisle felt suffocating. I didn't even look up at David waiting for me at the altar. My eyes were just glued to the front row. I couldn't stop staring at the spot where she was supposed to be. There was this single, empty white chair sitting right in the front row. It was just this glaring reminder of my guilt. Every time I looked at it, I felt like a total monster. I was celebrating while she was supposedly fighting for her life. During the reception, everyone was out there dancing and laughing, but I just couldn't handle it. The guilt was eating me alive. So I slipped away from the party and hid in the bridal suite. I sat in there alone, just desperately refreshing my phone. I was so scared I was going to get a call saying she had passed away. I kept texting her, begging for an update. But I got absolutely nothing back. Just dead silence. We didn't even go on a honeymoon. We couldn't afford it after giving her all our savings. Instead, we just spent the week at our apartment eating leftovers. And I was still glued to my phone, waiting for the clinic to call. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after the wedding, when my phone finally buzzed. My heart totally jumped. I thought it was the hospital. But it wasn't her. It was a message from my younger cousin, Chloe. I opened the text and my hands were literally shaking. The message was super short. It just said, "Hey, is this your mom?" And right below it was a link to an Instagram post. I clicked the link, figuring it was just some old photo of her. It took me to the profile of this woman named Brenda. She was this wealthy, superficial friend of my mom's I hadn't seen in years. My heart was pounding as the page loaded. As the image finally loaded, all the air just left my lungs. It was a carousel of photos. The first one showed Brenda and 3 other women lounging on pristine white sunbeds. My hands started to shake. I scanned the group of women, and right there in the center was my mother.
She looked more vibrant and healthy than I'd ever seen her.
I swiped to the next photo. It was my mom on a catamaran, wearing a bright sundress and holding champagne. No wheelchair, no medical equipment, no frailty.
I swiped again to a group selfie at a lavish restaurant. The caption said they were living their best lives in Costa Rica.
Then I looked at the date.
It was my wedding day.
While I was at the altar, staring at an empty chair, my mother was on a luxury vacation. A cold, sharp clarity just washed over me. I didn't cry, and I didn't scream. I just stared at the screen, zooming in on her smiling face. Seeing her look so genuinely happy while I was paralyzed by fear was surreal. Her healthy, tanned face just mocked my guilt. I looked closely at the location tag on the post. It was an ultra-exclusive 5-star luxury wellness resort in Costa Rica. My mind was racing as I searched the resort's name. I clicked on their booking page, scrolling past photos of pristine beaches.
I found the pricing for a 1-week stay in their premium oceanfront cabanas.
I needed to see the exact numbers. The total cost for the week loaded on the screen. It was exactly $8,000. My wedding fund. The money David and I bled ourselves dry to save. There was no clinic, and there were no doctors. She stole my wedding money to go on a luxury vacation. I sat in absolute silence, watching my entire reality fracture. Every ruined birthday, every dramatic hospital visit where they found nothing wrong, it all just clicked. She wasn't sick. She was a master manipulator. Her illness was a weapon she used whenever she felt her control slipping, and I was her most devoted victim. When David finally got home from work, he found me sitting in the exact same spot at the kitchen table. The apartment was dead silent. He immediately sensed the shift in the room and asked me what was wrong. I didn't say a single word to him. I couldn't even bring myself to say it out loud. Instead, I just turned my phone around and slid it across the table. He looked down at the photos, read the caption, and checked the location tag. I watched his jaw clench as it all hit him. His eyes darkened with this quiet, terrifying anger I'd never seen before. He looked up at me, clearly expecting me to be completely broken. But I wasn't. For the first time in my life, that suffocating blanket of guilt was just gone. It evaporated. And in its place was this cold, impenetrable armor. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. I didn't even hesitate. "We wait," I told him. "She gets back on Thursday." I didn't call her. I didn't text her. I just let her play out her little fantasy. I waited for her to come back to the country and step right back into her carefully constructed reality. Friday morning, my phone finally rang. It was her. I stared at the screen for a second, then answered on the second ring, keeping my voice completely flat. She immediately launched into her performance. Her voice was weak and breathy, telling me how awful the clinic was and how painful the treatments were. She actually claimed she spent my entire wedding day weeping in her bed. Then she asked if I could bring her some groceries, since she was too weak to drive. "Of course, Mom," I said. I drove to her house alone. David offered to come, but I needed to do this myself. This was the final chain I had to break, and I had to break it with my own hands. I walked into her living room, and it was exactly the same. She was wrapped in a heavy blanket, playing the sick role perfectly. But if you looked close, You could see the fading edges of a tropical tan.
She reached out this shaking hand as soon as I walked in.
She put on this weak voice saying how sorry she was that the doctors wouldn't let her leave. I just stood at the foot of the couch and stared down at her, not moving an inch.
I kept my voice totally flat and asked her how the facility was. I made sure to ask if the $8,000 covered everything. She let out this dramatic sigh and claimed they kept her on strict bed rest the whole time.
Then she reaches over and picks up this smooth, dark volcanic stone. She held it up like it was some kind of magical relic. She actually told me the head specialist gave it to her for energy alignment.
I looked at the stone, and I just felt this absolute freezing clarity. I pulled out my phone and went straight to the website for that Costa Rica resort.
I clicked right over to their spa amenities page without saying a word.
I turned the screen around so she could see it.
Right there was a professional photo of the exact same volcanic stone.
The text literally said you get a complimentary stone with every premium spa package.
Her eyes fluttered open, and she dropped the sick act for just a second. She stared at the glowing screen, read the words, and slowly looked up at me. I just locked eyes with her and said, "Costa Rica looks beautiful this time of year." The silence in that dark room was absolutely deafening. I just stood there watching the gears turn in her head while she desperately tried to spin it. I could literally see her mind racing, but she was completely trapped. Relentless. I didn't even give her a chance to make up a lie. I swiped on my phone and pulled up the screenshots of her friend's Instagram post. I asked her if the clinic served margaritas or if the champagne was part of her bed rest. For a split second, the frail, trembling, sick woman completely vanished. Her eyes hardened into these furious little slits, and the fake shaking instantly stopped. She sat straight up, and the blanket fell away, revealing a bright resort shirt right under her nightgown. She didn't even try to apologize. She just went straight on the attack. Suddenly, her voice was loud, strong, and completely vicious. She started screaming about how stressed she was and how she needed a sanctuary to heal. I didn't even yell back. I just looked at her and said she stole my wedding money. She claimed she was dying so she could go drink on a yacht. And I spent my whole wedding day feeling like a murderer. That totally set her off. She stood right up and screamed that she was my mother and I owed her that money. She actually said she had to get away from my toxicity. I just stared at her. I wasn't even angry anymore. Just empty. I realized I was looking at a total stranger. I told her I did owe her and I paid her with my childhood. But the account was finally closed. I turned around and started walking toward the door. She chased after me, yelling not to walk away from her. Then she went right back to the old playbook. She grabbed her chest and said I was giving her heart palpitations. Years ago, that threat would have brought me to my knees. But looking at her perfectly healthy posture, I just felt free. I looked right at her and told her to call an ambulance. I wasn't her nurse anymore. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. Stepping out of that dark house into the daylight felt amazing. It was like waking up from a nightmare. I got in my car and just drove. My phone started blowing up before I even left her street. First, she was furious, calling me an ungrateful brat. Then she switched back to playing the victim, saying she couldn't breathe. I just pulled over and blocked her number. I sat there in the quiet car for a minute. I closed my eyes and took a really deep breath. The air just felt lighter. For the first time in my life,
My chest didn't feel tight with anxiety.
When I got home, David was waiting for me. He didn't even ask how it went.
He just looked at my face, saw how calm I was, and pulled me into a hug.
I was finally free.
It's been 2 whole years since that day.
I haven't spoken to my mother once since I walked out her door.
My life is completely different now.
Of course, she tried to spin the story to the rest of the family. She told everyone I abandoned her because my new husband was controlling me. Say, a few aunts even sent me these long, guilt-tripping texts about how family is family.
I didn't even bother arguing with them. I just sent them the screenshots of her sipping champagne in Costa Rica.
I also attached the receipt for the $8,000 I sent her for that fake clinic.
The response was absolute silence.
They stopped messaging me immediately after that. It felt so good to just shut it all down with hard proof.
I used to think the worst thing that could happen was realizing your own mom didn't love you. I thought that kind of rejection would break me forever. But time gives you a totally different perspective. I learned something way more profound. The actual worst thing is spending your whole life shrinking yourself to keep someone else comfortable, especially when you realize their pain was just a performance to keep you trapped. When I look back, I know what I lost. I lost $8,000 that David and I worked so hard for. I lost the mom I thought I had and the peace I deserved on my wedding day. But what I gained in return was my actual life. I don't flinch in terror every time my phone rings anymore. I finally got rid of that suffocating knot of anxiety in my chest.
I don't overthink every little decision just to avoid upsetting someone else.
I refuse to carry the weight of someone else's fake misery. I'm finally free to just live for me. That massive guilt complex that ruled my life was built on pure lies. And the second the truth came out, the whole thing just crumbled to dust. It hurt, but it was the only way out. It was incredibly painful to accept the truth. Honestly, it was terrifying. When the foundation of your reality crumbles, you're left standing in the dust. I had to mourn the illusion of a mother I never actually had. But standing in the wreckage of that relationship changed me. I realized the fear I carried for 28 years wasn't even mine. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket forced onto my shoulders. And I finally took it off. For the first time in my life, I stepped outside and actually felt the sun on my face. I wasn't worried about rushing back to a dark room. I wasn't checking my phone for an emergency. I was just breathing. It took a long time to understand what she did to me. Sometimes the people who demand the most of your empathy possess none of their own. They're bottomless pits, and they'll drain you dry if you let them. My mother used my love as a weapon to keep me tethered to her. She knew I had a good heart, and she exploited it for control. But having a good heart doesn't mean you have to be a victim. People on the outside might judge me for cutting her off completely. They might think it's cold to block your own mother and never look back. But they didn't live in that dark, stuffy room with us. They didn't see the miraculous recoveries that only happened when she got her way. They didn't see the $8,000 lie that almost ruined my marriage. So, I really don't care about their judgment anymore. I built a new family with David. A family based on actual honesty, mutual support, and genuine love. We don't play games with each other's emotions. And we definitely don't use illness as a bargaining chip. Walking away from my mother was the hardest thing I've ever done. It went against every instinct I was programmed with since childhood. But I finally realized that walking away wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. I chose myself. I chose my husband. And for the rest of my life, I'm gonna keep choosing the light.